This DJ, he gets down. Go DJ, that's my DJ. This DJ, he gets down. Mixing records while they go. This DJ, he gets down.
All right, y'all. Welcome back to part 2 of Myth 3. The idea being that love alone makes a marriage. And in part 1, we kind of looked at this idea that really there was 2 main points, right? Or I think in the text I read there was 3 main points, right? The idea that a lot of times we conceive of the requirements for marriage as just this emotional bond between 2 people, right? If you've got this love between these 2 people, you're good to go for what you need for marriage, and everything should kind of work out. And we said that's kind of error number 1 on the one side, that love that is shared between the spouses in marriage is not just that emotional bond, and that was kind of a synthesis of the first myths, right? And then the second point that I really want to drive home, and that's going to be the point that's going to kind of take off today, is this idea that, well, a covenant marriage, and by that we really mean a real marriage, requires you to live up to its standards, right? You can't change the definition just to fit your mood, your culture, your time. Things really do exist for a reason. Again, think of, I think the example I gave in the text notes is night and day. You can't just start calling day night and night day. I mean, you can, of course, right? You're free to do so in the sense that you can call things whatever you want, but that doesn't change the reality. I had a friend in college. His name was Joe, and he was actually kind of a short guy, but we called him Big Joe. And he had this exact argument. I mean, the point was about something else, but I said, well, Joe, this is a Coca-Cola can, right? He said, well, I call it Pepsi. I said, well, this is a red pen. He said, well, I call it a black pen. And his point being is that language is arbitrary. It's not objective. It's relative, right? And so he said, who are we to decide what things are, what they're not? And he's got a sort of point, and this is, I think I mentioned this the other day, of the point is called nominalism. And you may have heard of this if you had Dr. Delahoussie's class. And you can get into this nitty-gritty of like, well, I give this to this, I give this name to this reality, you give this name to that reality. Who's to say who's right, right? And you start playing this name game. And that's kind of what's going on with Piers Morgan and Ryan Anderson with marriage. Piers Morgan is naming things to his heart's content, and Susie Orman's doing the same, where Ryan Anderson's trying to say, like, you can call it a same-sex marriage, you can call it whatever you want, that doesn't change what it is. And so when Piers Morgan says, are you against same-sex marriage, Ryan says that's like saying you're against a square circle. You can call something a square circle, but a square circle doesn't exist. Because Ryan's point is that what marriage is, it is the union of a man and a woman to be mother, or to be husband and wife, mother and father to any children that union produces. That's what it is. You can call it whatever you want, but it doesn't change the reality of it. The same thing, you can call night day, it's still night. You can call day night, it's still day, right? Now, we know that for most things, we accept that for most things, until it gets in the way of something that we want to do. Looks like we got maybe a guest lecturer over here. Isabel, you want to say hi to the guys back home? Want to say hi?
Yeah.
No, you don't want to say hi? Okay, so we're going to keep going with the lecture here. Okay, Isabel, we're going to give you the mic. Okay. Everyone say bye, Isabel. Okay, so that was Isabel. She came in on the 8th grade class one time before, so this is the first time she's come in on y'all's class. Okay, so why is this important? Because I think one of the things that we continually get wrong is we think that we can just decide for ourselves what things are. You can almost think of this like changing the settings in a video game, that you're lowering the settings so that you can win the game. You can just change whatever you want to fit where you're at. Marriage has certain demands, and we talked about this idea of conquering irreconcilable differences. You guys wrote it in your journal reflections. And I think people get fearful of those demands, and therefore they change their definition of what marriage is or what it takes to have a real marriage to fit where they're at, rather than rising to the challenge to see it through. So, what kind of unions can be marriages? Well, that's the point, is that what it really takes is the full requirements are a man and a woman to become husband and wife, to freely consent, to give of themselves till death do they part, for the spouse's good and the good of the family. And especially within a religious context, that idea is that the ultimate good is to be with God in heaven. That's the main point of marriage. We're cooking dinner right now too, so it's a busy time at home. Okay, but what about like civil marriages? So you have a picture here of a church wedding. We have a picture of City Hall. Aren't there such a things as civil marriage? Aren't there church marriages? Like, what's the difference? Like, we have these two things. They really are both exist. So what are you trying to say here, Mr. Flores? Okay, very briefly, there does exist the idea, the reality of civil unions, civil marriages that are honored by the city, or granted by the city, honored by the state and the federal government, that provide tax benefits to married couples for all kind of other reasons. That has absolutely nothing to do with what marriage really is, right? You could think about if you've ever seen the Pirates of the Caribbean, when Johnny Depp's character, Jack Sparrow, is saying like, what a ship is, what the Black Pearl really is freedom. This idea that you can go anywhere in the world, right? You can kind of think of what marriage really is this freedom to pursue the vocation that God has given you to better your spouse, better your family, to bring them to God. There are, of course, other definitions of ships, right? Like a ship has sails, it has, I forgot what he said. It's got the sails, what does he say? Anyway, the point is that he says that's what a ship is. Or like, that's what a ship has. But what a ship is freedom. For the civil union, you've got that same thing going on. That what a civil union has is you've got usually two people, sometimes more, right? But usually two people that promise certain things that look like a marriage, and the city grants that thing that looks like a marriage certain tax benefits and what it is, or what have you. But that doesn't actually make it a real marriage. Just because the government calls it so doesn't actually make it a real thing. So why are we looking at this? Well, let's get it to the things that are not marriages. Again, that idea of look at the antithesis to see what the thing really is. Why is it important? Okay, so what other things can be covenant marriages? And we've kind of already gone through this, so we're going to go really quickly. Could polygamy be a covenant marriage? And the text, I didn't assign it for this one because it's kind of brief, and we don't really need it for this one. The text says, it goes into great detail about why polygamy, polyamory, polygyny, these are not good things for both for society at large, but also for the people within the union. And that specifically, with polygamy, meaning one man with multiple wives, the wives are obviously not, they don't benefit. The children of these marriages don't benefit. Economically, the family doesn't benefit, and a society based upon polygamy also doesn't benefit. The socioeconomic upward mobility of polygamous families is very low. As far as education rates, they're also very low. And in terms of violence, domestic violence, sexual abuse, it's very high. And you can probably figure out why. You don't need the text to tell you. Self-marriage, with the Dennis Rodman example, or there was this woman in New York who tried to marry a building to save it from being destroyed. Things like that, obviously we can see why that's no good. The big one, and again, this is a much bigger sticking point when I first started teaching back in 2013, 2014, was same-sex marriage. Who are you to say, right, this is Piers Morgan's argument, who are you to say that two people, regardless of sex, who love each other, why cannot they get married, right? Why are you wanting to limit them from getting married, expressing their freedom in terms of what America provides? And Ryan's point is that you can go to any church, not any church, but you can find a church in America that will grant you a same-sex wedding ceremony. You could find any employer in America. There are employers that will provide you same-sex marriage benefits. Many states have same-sex marriage certificates to give out and provide you the same tax benefits as a man and a woman being married, right? So why is Ryan then still against it? His point is not that he's against same-sex marriage, but that he's for marriage, the reality of it as a man and a woman, husband and wife, mother and father. And it's really important to keep that reality in check. Again, this is not a politics class. We're not debating public policy here, and I mean, we can in the chats or whatever, but the point is that you want to keep the reality of what marriage is in your mind so that when you are discerning it, you have to think about, okay, Well, if marriage isn't just a contract, right? If it's not just about an emotional bond between consenting adults, if it's not just about making me feel happy, what is it really about? And it's the good of the spouse, it's the good of the children, it's that entire family unit as one, this comprehensive union, striving to be the best that they can be and ultimately bring each other to God.